It's 7:42 in the morning, August 17, 1942. The air at Eagle Farm Airfield near Brisbane, Australia, is thick with humidity and the smell of hot metal. Crouched under the wing of a Douglas A-20 Havoc bomber is Captain Paul Gunn. He's 43 years old, with 21 hard years in the Navy etched into the lines on his face. He watches mechanics weld heavy .50 caliber machine guns into the bomber's nose, right where the bombardier used to sit. For Gunn, this isn't just about the war, it's personal. His wife and their 4 children are trapped, prisoners in a Japanese camp in Manila. Every day he's here, they're there, and every day the news gets worse. The 5th Air Force is bleeding. They're losing bombers faster than replacements can cross the Pacific. In July alone, the 3rd Attack Group lost 11 A-20s, all of them trying to hit Japanese convoys from high altitude. It was a fool's errand. From 10,000 feet, hitting a zigzagging ship was nearly impossible. When they dared to drop lower, the Japanese deck gunners shredded them, turning the sky into a maze of flak and fire. Captain Ed Lyer, one of Gunn's colleagues, had just watched 3 of his crews burn and fall into the Coral Sea the week before. Meanwhile, the Japanese were reinforcing New Guinea almost casually, as if the Allied Air Force wasn't even there. But Paul Gunn, a man driven by desperation and a spark of mechanical genius, had a different idea. A radical, dangerous idea. What if, instead of dropping bombs from the heavens, you flew low enough to skip them across the water like stones? Hit the ships at point-blank range where you couldn't miss. There was just one problem: surviving the approach. To get that close, you had to fly straight into a wall of anti-aircraft fire. The only way to survive was to hit them harder and faster than they could hit you. You had to overwhelm their deck guns with a tidal wave of forward firepower. You had to turn the bombers into strafers. The A-20 Havoc, as it was, had 4 .30 caliber machine guns in its nose. It sounds like a lot, but .30 caliber rounds bounced off ship armor like hail on a tin roof. Useless. Gunn needed bigger teeth. He needed .50 caliber guns. 4 of them, mounted right where the bombardier sat, all firing straight ahead. Combined, they would spit out 1,700 rounds a minute. General George Kenney, the new, aggressive commander of the 5th Air Force, saw the desperation in Gunn's eyes and the logic in his madness. He gave him 1 week. 1 week to prove his crazy idea could work. Gunn and his mechanics became scavengers. They stripped the heavy .50 caliber guns from wrecked P-39 and P-40 fighters, ghost planes that would never fly again. The pilots were gone, but their guns could still fight. He mounted the guns, each weighing 64 pounds, on a makeshift steel frame inside the bomber's cramped nose compartment. 4 guns plus 200 pounds of ammunition. The extra weight, all of it packed into the nose, shifted the bomber's center of gravity dangerously forward. The first test flight was nearly the last. The pilot fought the controls the whole way as the A-20 tried to nosedive into the ground. It barely climbed. It fought him every second. Gunn spent the next 2 sleepless days rebalancing the entire aircraft. He moved heavy equipment to the rear. He meticulously adjusted the tail trim. The second test pilot came back, his face pale, but his eyes wide with excitement. He said the plane flew like it was angry, but it flew. On September 12, 1942, 16 of Gunn's modified A-20s hit the Japanese airfield at Buna. They didn't come from on high. They came in at treetop level, a screaming wave of noise and firepower. Their guns hammered the flight line, ripping through parked aircraft and silencing every anti-aircraft position. They destroyed 14 Japanese planes on the ground. The cost to the Americans? 0. Not a single A-20 was lost. Kenney was ecstatic. He wanted more. But the A-20, for all its newfound fury, had its limits. Its range was too short to reach the major Japanese bases across the formidable Owen Stanley Mountains. Its bomb load was too light. Gunn needed a bigger platform. He needed the B-25 Mitchell. Longer range, heavier payload, and most importantly, more space for more guns. In December, Gunn got his hands on a B-25C. He and his team pulled out the bombardier and the factory nose guns. In their place, they installed 4 .50 caliber guns.
Then they added 4 more in external cheek packs bolted to the sides of the fuselage. For good measure, they locked the top turret so it could only fire forward. That made 10 forward-firing guns. But Gunn wasn't done. He added 2 more on each side. The final tally was 14 50-caliber machine guns, all pointing straight ahead, capable of unleashing 215 pounds of lead every single second. The ground crews, shaking their heads in disbelief, nicknamed it Pappy's Folly. They were sure it would never fly.
If you want to see how Pappy Gunn's impossible gunship changed the course of the entire war in the Pacific, do us a favor and hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that these forgotten stories matter and helps us share them with more people. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Now, back to Pappy. Gunn flew the prototype himself to Charters Cowers to demonstrate it to the skeptical pilots of the 3rd Attack Group. The ground crews had been right about one thing: the plane was dangerously nose-heavy. On takeoff, it felt like it wanted to drop out of the sky. Gunn had to haul back on the stick with all his strength just to keep the nose up. But once it was airborne, Pappy's Folly wasn't a bomber anymore. It was a flying destroyer. General Kenny was sold. He ordered 12 more conversions immediately. The 81st Air Depot Group in Townsville worked 18-hour days, turning every B-25 they could find into a strafer. By February 1943, an entire squadron of 30 gunships was ready for combat. Kenny, proud of his men's ingenuity, sent Gunn's blueprints back to the experts at Wright Field in Ohio. The top Army Air Force engineers studied the modifications for 3 days. Then they sent a terse message back to Australia. Their verdict? The modifications were impractical. The balance would be fundamentally wrong. The airplane would be too heavy. It wouldn't fly properly. They officially recommended grounding every single one of Gunn's modified B-25s immediately. As fate would have it, General Kenny was in Washington when the message arrived. He walked into General Hap Arnold's office, where the very same engineers from Wright Field were waiting, ready to explain with charts and graphs why Pappy Gunn's gunship was an aerodynamic impossibility. Kenny listened patiently. Then he calmly informed them that 12 of those impossible airplanes had just played the starring role in the complete annihilation of a Japanese convoy in the Bismarck Sea. Every single transport ship had been sunk, and 60 more of the impossible planes were already being built back in Australia. General Arnold, it said, practically ran the red-faced engineers out of his office. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea began not with a bang, but with a whisper. On February 28, 1943, Allied codebreakers in Melbourne, hunched over their machines, decrypted a series of Japanese naval messages. A major convoy was forming up and leaving the fortress port of Rabaul. 8 transport ships, packed with nearly 7,000 fresh Japanese troops. 8 destroyer escorts. Their destination? Lae, on New Guinea's north coast. General Kenny had 72 hours to stop them. The convoy's route would take them across 400 miles of open water in the Bismarck Sea. The Japanese commanders weren't worried. They believed they had an invincible shield. Not armor, but weather. March was the peak of the monsoon season. Low clouds, torrential rain, and terrible visibility. They reasoned that Allied bombers couldn't hit what they couldn't see. They were right about the weather. They were dead wrong about the bombers. On March 2nd, a lone reconnaissance plane spotted the convoy steaming south. B-17 flying fortresses were sent to attack from 15,000 feet, dropping their bombs through breaks in the clouds. They dropped 137 bombs and claimed multiple hits. Post-battle analysis, however, revealed they had sunk exactly nothing. High-altitude bombing against moving ships was still a waste of time. The Japanese convoy, unscathed, kept coming. That night, the ships scattered to make harder targets. The Japanese commanders were confident. They'd reach Lae by dawn on March 4th, unload the troops under their own fighter cover, and change the tide of the war in New Guinea. They had no idea what was waiting for them at first light. On the evening of March 2nd, Captain Ed Lyer briefed his pilots at Port Moresby. The plan was audacious. 12 of Pappy Gunn's B-25 strafers, 30 modified A-20 Havocs with Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters and American P-38 Lightnings flying top cover to deal with any Japanese Zeros.
The strafers would go in at masthead height, just 50 feet off the water. Gun range would be point blank. The strategy was brutally simple. Overwhelm the deck guns with a concentrated storm of 50 caliber fire, then skip bomb the helpless ships while the crews were stunned or dead. Get in, get out before the Zeros knew what hit them. Liar had flown exactly one practice mission using this new tactic. One. His navigator nervously asked what would happen if a strafer took fire on the approach. Liar's grim reply, "We'll find out tomorrow." The briefing ended at 10 p.m. Nobody slept that night. At 6:30 a.m. on March 3rd, the strike force assembled over Cape Ward Hunt, 137 aircraft in total. The B-17s would attack first from high altitude to draw the defensive fire upwards. Then, while the Japanese gunners were distracted, the strafers would come in from below like sharks from the deep. The Japanese convoy was just 70 miles from its destination when the B-17s appeared. The heavy bombers rained down their payloads through scattered clouds. The Japanese transports opened up with every gun they had, filling the sky with black puffs of flak. And then the strafers arrived. Liar led the B-25s in from the southeast, so low they were kicking up spray from the wave tops. 14 forward-firing guns per aircraft. That was 168 heavy machine guns across the first wave of 12 planes. They flew line abreast, a solid wall of firepower 300 yards wide, hurtling across the sea at over 200 miles per hour. The Japanese lookouts on the transport Kyokuse Maru spotted them at 2 miles. The ship's captain screamed orders, trying to turn the vessel. It was too late. The B-25s opened fire at 800 yards. The 50 caliber rounds looked like a giant chainsaw cutting across the surface of the water. They slammed into the ship's superstructure, shredded the bridge into splinters, and killed the anti-aircraft crews before they could even turn their guns to face the threat. 3 B-25s dropped their bombs from just 100 yards out. The first bomb skipped perfectly off the water, slammed into the hull below the waterline, and detonated deep inside the engine room. The second bomb hit amidships. The Kyokuse Maru was dead in the water just 30 seconds after the strafers appeared. It was burning, listing heavily to port, and would sink in less than an hour. And that was just the beginning. The transport Teo Maru tried to run. The captain pushed his engines to their limit, a frantic 15 knots. The B-25s were closing at 240 knots. The math was simple and brutal. 4 strafers bracketed the fleeing ship. Their converging streams of 50 caliber fire swept the decks clean. The anti-aircraft crews died at their guns. The bridge windows shattered into a million pieces. The ship's executive officer was killed instantly. The captain lasted 10 seconds longer before a burst cut him down. The strafers dropped 8 bombs. 5 of them hit. The ship literally broke in half. Most of the Japanese soldiers were trapped below decks. They never had a chance. The Teo Maru sank in 6 minutes. Survivors who jumped into the sea wearing their full combat gear were dragged underwater by the weight of their own packs. The battle became a slaughter.
Australian bow fighters raked the decks of the destroyer Shikanami as it tried to screen the transports. When the B-25s arrived, the destroyer had no defense left. Bombs hit it from port, starboard, and amidships. It was crippled, burning, and abandoned by its crew a few hours later. By 9 a.m., the Japanese convoy was a scattered, burning wreck spread across 40 square miles of ocean, but the day wasn't over. The strafers flew back, rearmed, refueled, and returned at 2 p.m. The Japanese had no fighter cover. Their Zeros were on the ground at Leh, refueling. They were sitting ducks when the second wave arrived. The transport Oigawa Maru took 12 direct bomb hits. The ship's main magazine detonated in a cataclysmic explosion, a fireball so immense it was visible from Port Moresby, 130 miles away. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left. No wreckage, no oil slick, no survivors. 1,800 Japanese soldiers, gone in an instant. By the evening of March 3rd, the convoy ceased to exist. All 8 transports were sunk. 4 of the 8 escorting destroyers were at the bottom of the sea. Of the nearly 7,000 Japanese troops who had left Rabaul, fewer than 1,200 ever reached Leh. The rest were dead. Allied losses for the entire operation: 4 aircraft and 13 aircrew. General MacArthur called it one of the most complete and annihilating combats of all time. The Japanese never again attempted to reinforce New Guinea with a major convoy. The war in the Southwest Pacific had turned, and it turned because of Paul "Pappy" Gunn's impossible gunship. Back in Australia, Kenny sent a message to General Hap Arnold in Washington on March 5th. The subject line read, "Commerce Destroyer Modifications Approved for Production." The message itself was brief. It stated that 12 B-25 strafers had just destroyed an entire Japanese convoy and requested the immediate integration of the forward gun package into all B-25s coming off the factory line. Arnold called the president of North American Aviation, Dutch Kindleberger, that same afternoon. Kindleberger said his engineers needed to see the modifications for themselves. Arnold replied that he was sending the man who designed them. Paul Gunn was going to California. Gunn didn't want to go. His wife, Folly, and their 4 children were still in the Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila. They had been prisoners since January 1942, 14 long months. For Gunn, every mission was a step closer to liberating the Philippines. Going to California felt like running in the wrong direction. Kenny made it a direct order. The 5th Air Force needed hundreds of factory-built strafers, and Gunn was the only man who could show the engineers how to do it right. The general gave his word. Gunn would be back in the Pacific in 6 weeks. Gunn landed in Long Beach, California, and walked into a different world. The North American Aviation Plant was a city unto itself, 140 acres of roaring machinery and 20,000 workers churning out one new B-25 every 4 hours. The factory engineers, with their slide rules and pristine blueprints, studied Gunn's hand-drawn sketches. They asked for his stress calculations. Gunn said he didn't have any. They asked about wind tunnel testing. Gunn said his testing was done in the sky, over New Guinea. One engineer pointed out that the muzzle blast from the cheek guns would buckle the fuselage pin. Gunn agreed. It did, he said, and then showed them the simple blast tubes he'd welded on to solve the problem. The engineers spent 2 weeks reverse engineering Gunn's battlefield fixes into production-ready drawings. They strengthened the nose, redesigned the gun mounts, and calculated the precise adjustments needed to perfect the center of gravity. The first factory-built B-25G strafer rolled off the assembly line on May 10, 1943. It had 4.50 caliber guns in a solid nose, but it also had a new surprise: a 75mm M4 cannon, the same kind used in a Sherman tank. One shell could hole a destroyer below the waterline. They built 400 of those. Then they improved it. The B-25H model added more guns, bringing the total back up to 14. The final version, the B-25J, removed the slow-firing cannon and replaced it with 4 more machine guns, 18 forward-firing .5 caliber guns. It was the most heavily armed production bomber in history. North American Aviation built nearly 5,000 of them. Gunn returned to Australia in May, exactly 6 weeks after he left, just as Kenny had promised. But his family was still in Manila. The strafers he'd created kept hunting. They sank barges, cargo ships, and oil tankers. They destroyed Japanese supply lines. The Japanese stopped moving ships in daylight. It didn't matter. The strafers learned to hunt at night, using radar, becoming a terrifying phantom menace the Japanese called the Black Death. On November 2, 1943, a massive force of 59 B-25s led an attack on Rabaul Harbor itself. In 15 minutes of coordinated, low-level chaos, they hit 30 ships, sinking or crippling more than half of them. Rabaul was finished as a major naval base. Pappy Gunn flew that mission. He was 44 years old, a staff officer who didn't have to fly combat, but his family was in Manila, and every mission was a step closer. The intelligence reports from the Santo Tomas camp were getting worse. Rations cut, medicine gone, prisoners were dying. The Japanese camp commander had issued a chilling threat. If Allied forces approached Manila, all prisoners would be executed. Gunn told General Kenny he wanted to fly the first plane over Manila when the time came. Kenny promised he could. But on November 27, 1944, the Japanese bombed the American airfield at Tacloban. Gunn was in the operations tent when the bombs hit.
A blast wave knocked him off his feet. Shrapnel tore through his left leg and shoulder. He tried to get up to check on his aircraft, but collapsed. The wound in his leg was severe, an artery was severed. The surgeons told him he wouldn't fly again for at least 6 months, if ever. At 45, with his injuries, he could go home, honorably discharged. Gunn refused. He told the surgeon he wasn't going anywhere until his family was free. The Battle of Manila began on February 3, 1945. American forces fought street by street, house by house. That same day, the 1st Cavalry Division broke through Japanese lines and liberated the 3,700 prisoners at Santo Tomas. Gunn's wife Folly weighed just 89 pounds. Their children were skeletal, ravaged by malaria and dysentery, but they were alive. Against doctor's orders, Gunn flew to Manila the very next day. His leg was still bandaged, and he walked with a cane. He found his family in a makeshift hospital. Folly didn't recognize him at first. In the 3 years since she'd last seen him, he had lost 40 pounds and his hair had gone completely gray. She thought he was one of the doctors. Then he said her name, and she knew. The war for Pappy Gunn was finally over. By the end of the war, the nearly 5,000 strafer variants built from Gunn's design had sunk over 800 Japanese ships and destroyed 2,000 aircraft on the ground. The impossible concept became the most decisive weapon in the theater. Gunn retired as a colonel in 1948.
He returned to the Philippines and did something remarkable. He rebuilt Philippine Airlines, the company he had started before the war. The man whose innovations had brought so much destruction dedicated the rest of his life to connecting people, flying routes across the islands he had fought so hard to liberate. Tragically, on October 11, 1957, the man who had survived countless combat missions and revolutionized aerial warfare died. The small twin-engine plane he was a passenger in flew into a storm and crashed into a mountainside. He was 57 years old. Today, the AC-130 gunship and the A-10 Warthog are direct descendants of Pappy Gunn's B-25. His innovations changed air combat forever, yet most people have never heard his name. The portrait of him that hangs in the headquarters of the airline he rebuilt is a mystery to most of the employees who walk past it every day. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about mechanics who saved thousands of lives with gun packages and field modifications. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, the Philippines? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Pappy Gunn doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.